Whoa! Sometimes they just come flying up out of the water at you.
Hi, I'm Alex McCrickard. I'm the Aquatic Education Coordinator at the Department of Wildlife Resources.
I'm Gary Martel. I'm Deputy Director at the Department of Wildlife Resources and the past Chief of Fisheries.
Gary and I are out here on the James River, and this is a fishing report for the month of April. April's a great time to really start the spring season, and when I think of April, Gary, I think of the runs of our spring anadromous species out of the Atlantic Ocean into the Chesapeake Bay and up into our tidal rivers here in Virginia. And anadromous are species of fish that primarily live in saltwater environment but come up into freshwater to spawn. And I think people typically think about salmon as an anadromous species. We don't have salmon in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, but we're blessed with striped bass, hickory shad, American shad, species like blueback herring, alewife, and even white perch. And they provide great opportunity whether you live in Richmond and you like fishing on the James River, whether you live in Fredericksburg and like fishing on the Rappahannock, or whether you live in the DC area and like fishing on the Potomac.
That's right. They're all up and down the coast. It's great fishing and fish with a variety of techniques. It's a great family-oriented fishery.
Absolutely.
Excellent bank fishing here in Richmond. The same thing's true in Fredericksburg along the Rappahannock River. So you don't have to have a boat. I started out bank fishing when I first came here in 1990.
Absolutely.
So the opportunities are tremendous, and you can get your family out. You can teach kids to fish. It's a tremendous opportunity. In fact, today, my son and my grandson are both fishing with us here on the river. We've got 2 boats and 3 generations.
3 generations of Martels on the water. One of the best things about shad fishing is when the fishing can really start to get good in late March, but really April, we think about kind of the middle of April being really peak time for shad fishing. And when they're in the rivers thick, the action can be fast and furious. So if you've never fished before, it can be a great way to get introduced to the sport of fishing is coming out and trying your luck for hickory shad. We're going to break down some of the tactics and techniques for approaching these species, and you can do really well with a spin fishing outfit or a conventional tackle in addition to fly fishing. Gary, you want to run us through some of the spin fishing tactics that you like to utilize out here?
Sure. The easiest technique to use is to fish with shad darts. Shad darts are really pretty simple. Most people now use a double dart rig. I like to put them on wine corks. That works extremely well because you don't get them tangled up inside of your box. You can just peel it off. I typically use a big dart in front of a little dart, and you'll see there's usually something around 1/4 of an ounce. You tie a small swivel on at the top, and then down at the bottom. And this is why you do it. You get hung up in your clothes. You put a smaller dart at the bottom, and I usually end up catching the fish on the trailer.
Yep, and bright colors, right? Chartreuse.
Always chartreuse and white are really good. Red and yellow, red and white. And if you need additional weight, it's usually good to get down near the bottom. I use a lot of little bullet weights.
Yeah, that helps to get down.
They really help.
Good point you raised, Gary. It's important to get down when you're fishing for shad. You want to get down in the water column close to the bottom where they are primarily holding.
And then the other besides shad darts, the other thing that we use a lot of is we use a lot of spoons. We use gold and silver spoons. Same thing. You've got to put weight in front of them. You put a bullet weight in front of a swivel. The spoons work really well. It's a quick flash.
Yep.
The fish are actually not feeding. The fish are on a spawning run, and they're doing what we call a reaction strike.
Very territorial.
And they're in big schools, and usually when they're biting fast and furious. And sometimes they shut off. This morning's a great example.
Great example.
Early, the fish were biting really well. We were catching fish regularly, and when they stopped, it just shut right off, and you have trouble catching a fish every 15 or 20 casts, or even more than that.
So I like doing a little bit of fly fishing while we're out here. I spin fish as well, but Gary, I know you do a lot of fly fishing, and you don't have to use a spin fishing approach. You can fly fish if you like that. And whether you're out here on a sunny, beautiful day like this, or a cloudy, rainy day, whenever you can get out is kind of the best time to get out. But I like throwing full sinking line, and that's key. You got to get your flies down. This is a 9-foot 8 weight with a 350 grain sinking line. It's a little windy today, The 8-weight's helping me kind of cut through the wind, but that full sinking line is key. If it's a little bit less windy and I can allow my fly to sink a little bit longer, I actually will go with a lighter setup. This is a 250 grain full sinking line on a 9-foot 6-weight. And I've actually got 2 flies here. I like to throw these in tandem, but these shad flies, they don't have to be anything fancy. They're kind of the fly fishing version of a shad dart, but ultimately what we're looking at is a small fly that's flashy. They're oftentimes tied with dumbbell eyes or a large bead head or a cone head. Whites, yellows, reds, small flashy flies that can get down into the water column where the shad are. And again, I'm typically casting either perpendicular to the current, or I'm quartering it downstream, letting it sink, and I'm letting it swing. And oftentimes on that rise, the fish are picking it up.
Yeah, just as it goes through the end of the arc and starts to come up.
Exactly.
And you have to keep it in motion, and it's good to have a slight twitching to it.
Absolutely.
Whether you're using a fly rod or a spinning rod.
So shad are not only a great species to target when you're fishing, but as an agency, we monitor the runs of our anadromous species up and down our tidal rivers. We're now going to hear from fisheries biologist and fish passage coordinator Alan Weaver at the Department of Wildlife Resources.
This afternoon, we're down here on the tidal James River near 14th Street Bridge, and we're sampling with an electrofishing boat. This boat's specifically designed for electrofishing, and what we're doing is we're putting a current in the water, and it stuns the fish temporarily so that we can get our nets on them. And you have a couple people working up front to net the fish. We drive around, we hit a school of fish, we scoop them up, put them in the live well, and then we take measurements from the fish that we need to get measurements from. So this afternoon we're getting lengths and weights on blueback herring. We saw a few alewife that are still in the river. We had some hickory shad. We had a nice sized striped bass. Once we're done getting the data from the fish, we release the fish back into the water, and most of them are going to swim off and be fine. A few fish we will keep for various research projects, like taking the ear stones out of which are called the otoliths, take them out of the fish and look to see how old the fish are. It's important to have an age structure on your fish so you can have lengths and weights and age so that you can look at how healthy the population is. One of the other reasons we get the length and weight data is just to look at long-term trends and whether or not the fish are getting smaller or bigger. That can have some implications for spawning power, the fecundity of a female, for example. And we just try to keep track of that while we're out here collecting numbers, because we're also interested in how many fish there are. And so this gives us one way of looking at population trends. As far as the hickory shad go, hickory shad numbers are fairly stable. There hasn't been much of an increase or a decrease over the last, say, 10 years on both the Rappahannock and the James River. And so that's a good thing. There are no regulations on hickory shad, but we do need to keep an eye on it to make sure that we don't see some sort of a decrease in the hickory shad population. Of course, American shad are still under harvest moratorium, and that's been going on since 1994. One thing that's different between hickory shad and American shad is that the hickory shad tend to reach sexual maturity sooner, and they also will repeat spawn more often than the American shad. So if you had a 5-year-old hickory shad, it may have spawned once or twice already in its life. In the mid-Atlantic, being the Chesapeake Bay, the James River, the Rappahannock, the American shad tend to be about 50% what we call iteroparous and 50% semoparous. Iteroparous means they spawn more than once in their life. Semoparous means they spawn once. So with the hickory shad being more of a repeat spawning species, that tends to help them reboot their population. Years ago, like 30 years ago, hickory shad numbers were pretty low also. When that harvest moratorium went into effect for American shad in 1994, I think it really helped the hickory shad as well, because a healthy female hickory shad is about the same size as a good, healthy American shad. So I think without those nets being set, the hickory shad just benefited from that lack of commercial harvest. So we're just keeping an eye on the hickory shad population, making sure that we don't see any kind of drastic decline in the numbers. And so far this year, we've seen pretty good numbers of hickory shad on both the Rappahannock and the James River. Yeah, American shad, the numbers of American shad have been disappointing over the last several years. Early on in the process with the shad fry stocking program and providing the fish passage, we started to see a little bit of an increase in American shad numbers, and that was encouraging, but then things basically flattened out. We haven't seen what we would call a population level response to the stocking program and to providing all this extra habitat. One thing people need to keep in mind is that even before we started opening up dams, if you look back to even the 50s and 60s, we didn't really start seeing that decline until the 70s. So even in the 50s and 60s, you had tenfold as many shad out here as we do now. And that's without any fish passage, because the fish are able to spawn in these freshwater stretches of the tidal rivers, you know, from Hopewell up to Richmond and up on the Rappahannock. They can spawn in that tidal fresh water. That's not to say we don't want to provide passage for these fish to get to their historical spawning grounds, because that would be a way to really try to kickstart the population recovery. These fish used to travel all the way past Richmond, all the way past Lynchburg, you know, all the way up the James River. So there were just, you know, millions of fish that came in the river, and that population level maintained itself year after year. So something happened, you know, a combination of overfishing, long-term lack of access to historical spawning habitat, and lots of other factors that there's just lots of pressures on these fish up and down the river. And so when people are out here angling for fish and they might happen to catch a fish that they think is an American shad, it's really important to identify it properly and get that fish back in the water as soon as you can, because the American shad, really, every single one of them is precious to the recovery effort. And it's just important to try to get those back in the water as soon as you can.
On a recent trip, we found success with hickory shad in cloudy, rainy conditions.
All right, hooked up here on a shad. James River. God, I love these fish jump. You took that bright orange shad fly there. Looks like a fat fish.
While cloudy, low light conditions can be excellent for shad fishing, you can also find success on bright, sunny days.
Another feisty hickory. He took the orange fly, bright orange fly with that yellow tail.
Nice.
Little hickory shad here. Took the little white and red shad fly. Popped that out of his mouth. Pretty fish. Even the cameraman's getting in on the footage.
What we got here? Oh, not bad.
While there are currently no regulations on hickory shad, there is a moratorium on American shad in addition to a moratorium on blueback herring and alewife. While anglers usually catch hickory shad, it's not uncommon to catch an American shad every once in a while. Here, Alan Weaver demonstrates how to easily identify the difference between hickory and American shad.
So a lot of times when people are fishing and they want to know the difference between an American shad and a hickory shad, here's a nice female hickory shad that we just shocked up here down in the city of Richmond on the James. And with the American shad, the easiest way to tell that it's an American shad is that when you close the mouth of the fish, so I'll open up the mouth. When you close the mouth, the top and the bottom jaw are equal. Or you could even say their top lip and their bottom lip. There's no overhang or underbite. It's perfectly equal. And American shad tend to be more symmetrical top to bottom also. Then with the hickory shad, their lower jaw or their lower lip sticks way out in front of their upper lip or their upper jaw. And so when you close the mouth, you get a protrusion of that lower jaw. It's pretty significant. It's pretty pronounced. And I'll put the two side by side right there. You can see that difference with the jaw. The other thing about hickory shad is that they're a little bit less symmetrical top to bottom. They're a little flatter along the top and a little deeper bellied. And they also have a distinct pigment mark on the base of every scale, almost like squares of dots. But really the jaw is what you want to go by. That jaw sticking out on the hickory shad is a telltale that it's a hickory shad.
Thanks for tuning in to this month's Fishing Report. Today we launched out of Ancaro's boat landing here in downtown Richmond, owned by the city of Richmond. Hopefully these tips and tricks can help you have success while shad fishing, and hopefully you're now able to easily tell the difference between an American and hickory shad. Remember, it's essential that we return American shad to the water as soon as we catch them to promote the restoration of the species moving forward. Comment below, let us know what questions you have about shad fishing. We'll see you next time.